In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. Paul Weigel is a father, 6-time Ironman triathlete, a college professor, and a self-described professional dabbler. A lover of the outdoors and hiking, he spent much of his life in the Pacific Northwest, finishing countless races and climbing many mountains, including Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, and Mount Adams. Now living in Arizona, he is exploring different ventures while checking things off his must-do list with regularity. But his real passion and his real inspiration is creating unforgettable memories with his daughter, who is a teen. He's also a cancer survivor who wrote about his adventures in the new book, Iron Dad, a cancer survivor's story of discovering strength, life, and love through fatherhood. His website is irondadbook.com. Paul, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me, Terry. That's beautiful. Every time I hear that, I tear up a little bit. So thank you. That was wonderful.
Your story is particularly inspiring because you've overcome a number of life challenges. Take us back to the beginning. Before cancer, before college, what was it like growing up as Paul Weigel?
Life growing up as Paul Weigel was hard. Forever, if you had asked me how I felt, I would have said I hurt. Every single day was the experience of having so much pain and so much just agony of how life had grown up and the experiences I had that I wanted to scream, but I didn't have a way to explore it. As a kid, I was a little bit socially awkward and really was that kid who was beat up and bullied and had some not great things happen to what happens to those kids who are beat up and bullied. And then actually, as I was growing up and starting to figure out my way, my college sweetheart, she actually ended up overdosing and she passed away our senior year of college. And so for a long time, way before cancer and way before everything else, was just about trying to get through each and every single day.
Last summer, I went to my 50th class reunion, and I was stunned to talk to so many of the people that I thought had their act completely together in high school that told me they were carrying burdens none of us ever knew about. Have you found as an adult that experience is more universal than you realized?
For sure. I think we all have this identity that when we look at each other and we talk with each other, we say, "How are you?" And our answer needs to be, "I'm fine. How are you?" But every single day and every single person has got trials and tribulations, whether it be moms and dads who are fighting behind the scenes, or illnesses, or financial challenges. Life is figuring out the shit we're dealing with and getting up every single day and moving forward. So absolutely, some of the people that I've looked back and said, wow, they really had their stuff together, to later on find out that they're total train wrecks too. I guess there has been a little solace in that, but that is certainly the case. I think about movie Rocky Balboa, where Rocky is talking to his son, and there's a time where he's saying, "It's so hard," and Rocky says, "No, that's the point of life. You keep getting knocked down and you keep stepping up and you keep moving forward." And I think that's applicable for all of us and our experiences every single day, for sure.
Paul Weigel is our guest. His book is Iron Dad, a cancer survivor's story of discovering strength, life, and love through fatherhood. What were you doing with your life at the time you were diagnosed?
When I was in my late 30s, life finally seemed to come together. I had met Laurel at the time, and we had just a wonderful first few years. We got engaged at the top of the Empire State Building, and we had some amazing, wonderful experiences. We were in our late 30s, early 40s, decided to have a kid, and life changes when you have a kid. And I'm sure, as everybody of a new parent, you know how exhausted you are. But my life, certainly at that time, was ultimately focused on raising my daughter and seeing the wonderful little girl that she was, where my life had been hard and I had been really faced with a lot of challenges. I worked hard and I played way too hard in my 20s and 30s, but all of a sudden to have this little mini me where I was able to care for her and be awake even though the early mornings and late nights were incredibly hard, they were also delightful because I finally had found a purpose. I had finally found love and understood what love was about. And so before I had cancer, I was exhausted, but my life was really about seeing how great of a young woman, she wasn't a woman at that point, how great of a young person I could help develop.
How did you discover that you had cancer?
Oh, geez. I was diagnosed when I was 43. In retrospect, I had symptoms of being sick for a long time. When I was in my late 30s, all of a sudden my digestive system started to change. And where I used to love pizza, and pizza was my go-to meal, as probably every bachelor in their 30s would say, but all of a sudden I liked pizza, but pizza did not like me. And so I started having some symptoms happening there. Didn't really pay a lot of attention to it because at that point I had gotten into exercise and I had gotten into doing a lot of different things, but my symptoms continued to progress. That as we move forward, I mentioned being tired. And when you have a newborn, when you have a child and you're spending all this time with limited hours of sleep, I just assumed that my fatigue was based on the fact that I was getting 5 hours of sleep a night trying to take care of this young person with her mom, but I never was rebounding. And then when I was in my early 40s, as I would go to the bathroom, I started having blood in my stool. And each time I would use the bathroom, there'd be a little blood in the toilet. Now, the ironic part was I had talked with physicians, I had talked with doctors about this more than once, that through either a regular physical or actually I'd had a hip surgery. And when I was doing the pre-surgery consults, talked about these issues coming up. And both in the times that I talked with the doctor, they said, you're way too young to have cancer. We're not even going to worry about it. Very much likely just a hemorrhoid. You're riding a bike a lot. Don't worry about it, anything. Then when things actually got really critically bad, all of a sudden, after that surgery, I had incredible intestinal discomfort. I actually was on an airplane flight going back from Chicago to Seattle and got in so much pain and just could not even possibly go to the bathroom that we almost needed to have the flight diverted because I was so ill. And finally, with all that, even though I had talked to other doctors, I went to see a GI specialist. And that is, if I had not done that, I would not be here. When I went and saw the GI specialist and I talked through my symptoms, he said, we're just going to do a colonoscopy, make sure we've got everything under control. And we did the pre-testing. Actually, this is before Cologuard and other of the new tests came out. My test for cancer, one of those tests came back negative. So I was having the thought of having cancer was nowhere on my mind at all. Had the colonoscopy, and as I came out of the fog, the doctor said that he actually was not able to complete the colonoscopy, that there was a mass. He also said the mass was so large that they tried to use the smaller scope that they would use for infants, and that my mass was so large that they couldn't even use that. And it's interesting, a lot of people, and discussions I've had, people say, what do you say when the doctor says you have cancer? He didn't say you had cancer. I said, what do you mean a tumor? What do you mean a mass? And he said, it's large. I said, do you mean cancer? And he said, based on what I'm seeing, yes, but we need to do pathology to confirm it. But he was not going to be the one to say, you have cancer. So I was 43 years old with a just turned 3-year-old daughter and a wife of 4 years, learning that I had a tumor that was basically completely blocking my large intestine. And when they finally did tests and did my CAT scan on it, it turned out that my tumor was the size of my fist.
What happened next?
Just first was even trying to understand the magnitude of what was going on. You walk in thinking that your life is, yes, you've got something going on in your gut, but you've been told everything in the world that you don't have cancer. And then all of a sudden to find it being massive, it very quickly became trying to assemble an army, especially with the preliminary understanding of how big and severe it was. We started going to every doctor and learning as much as we could quickly. Went to a couple local doctors that it felt like they were downplaying it, that, okay, we could do a surgery, we could get it done, but didn't fully understand the magnitude of it. And so after a bunch of different discussions, we finally ended up at the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, which is now the Fred Hutch in Seattle, and where they really gave a full comprehensive assessment and a discussion of the treatment that I would have. And the treatment that I would have was much larger and much more extensive than anything I ever possibly would have thought about. But it validated how serious the situation was.
One of the things that surprised my wife and me when she was diagnosed was that there were some people that we had been able to count on throughout our lives in the toughest times who couldn't deal with the cancer and faded away. And there were also others who had been on the periphery that we barely knew that became some of our closest friends. How did this cancer journey impact those close to you?
I had a few key friends who just absolutely stepped up in ways that I never, ever possibly could have imagined. My friend Joe, he and I hiked and we did a bunch of different things. And immediately thereafter, he was there to do anything he possibly could for me. He was there at my first chemotherapy appointment. When I was so sick that I couldn't even do anything, he actually rode in a 200-mile bike ride wearing a Livestrong jersey in tribute to me. And I had several of my colleagues at work, specific friend Sarah, who just did, she was like a sister to me. And in the same way, my sister absolutely jumped up, talked with doctors and evaluated and leaned in as much as she could, even though she lived 2,000 miles away. But at the same time, where you say it either brings people together or separates you out, my marriage really suffered. We were both, when we got married, we were both in our late 30s, and we had not been married before, so we were independent and strong. And I mentioned we had a toddler. And when you have a toddler, that is overwhelming and that is so exhausting. But then when you add in the magnitude of my illness and how much it was and how serious it was, that strain really caused major issues within our marriage. And unfortunately, shortly after finishing up our treatment, we decided it was best that we both move on because there was too much of a burden to carry from that time.
Paul Weigel is our guest. His fascinating book is Iron Dad, a cancer survivor's story of discovering strength, life, and love through fatherhood. Why did you write the book?
The book was a long time coming, Terry. When I was going through treatment, we talked about people coming close or breaking or separating apart. I was petrified that I was going to die. Even though I was making a point to have this very outward persona and own this of being a strong, capable person, I didn't ever want anybody to be in the same position I was, that to have had symptoms, to have had some of these challenges, it just was abhorrent to me that anybody could be in that spot. So I started a blog as I was going through treatment. And the treatment described my ups and downs, it was just as much of a way for me to show that and tell myself that I was powerful and strong through all of it. And I had this blog that started basically the day after I got diagnosed. And I had the blog until the first time that after I had finished all of my treatment, that the doctor said that I was cancer-free. And so I had this blog. It was a decent blog, but I needed to put that time behind me. And so I took all of the content and I basically put it in. I had a digital copy, but I took all the content, put it in a box, and literally put it on a shelf, out of sight, out of mind, not to think about for a long time. And 10 years later, even though I had gotten my very first cancer, I'll call it a cancer-free card, then that's when your doctor says no evidence of disease. I had doctors always checking on something. I had mentioned a hip surgery before, got an artificial hip, and so there would be weird reflections or different things that came up. So even though I was officially not a cancer patient, I was still being monitored, and then I would have different spots and different aspects. And so I didn't officially get my cancer-free card where they said I was no longer a cancer patient. I was no longer going in for anything for 9 years. And so here I was at 9 years, and we mentioned my life has been devoted to raising my daughter, and especially after getting separated and divorced, and being afraid that I was going to die, trying to lead a wonderful life for her. As she got older, she's now a teenager. Strengths and weaknesses to being a teenager, I'll grant you that. But she started asking more questions of trying to understand what happened during that time. Okay, what was it like? What were your experiences? And so I took my blog and I just started trying to write a story that would make sense to her. And originally, this story, it really was just going to be the blog, a little bit of an intro, and a little bit of a conclusion. But then as I took a step back, it was more important, rather than me have it be matter of fact for her, that the story end up being a look back on my life of what happened before she was born, during the time I was sick, and then how much of an inspiration she was during all that time, and how we have worked together to have a great life now. So it was a long time process to finally come together with this story. And I'll be darned, it turned out to be a nice little piece that was much bigger than just a book I was going to give to my kid that hopefully she would read someday.
What made you decide to publish it?
So as I finished the book, I started socializing it just a little bit. When people started looking at it, they said that my biggest thing has always been, as I work on things, I want it to be good. I want it to be nice. And I knew my book was good for my daughter, but I didn't know it would be good for anybody else. As I was socializing it to people saying, is this any good? At the same time, the American Cancer Society came out with a report saying that colorectal cancer numbers were increasing dramatically, that colon cancer had become the number one leading cause of cancer deaths for men, surpassing prostate cancer. That colorectal cancer was now the number 2 leading cause of death for women. That now, as numbers continue to increase, 1 in 20 people will get colon cancer. All those numbers scared me, and I found horrible that this was happening and people needed other ways to be aware of it. But just as much, what happened was, as I was socializing, I started seeing how much people who are getting diagnosed were still just being passive victims and letting cancer beat them. And that was just absolutely unacceptable to me. Here we are 10 years later from when I got diagnosed, now 11 years, and to see people still be shocked that they have cancer, let alone be overwhelmed with what are they supposed to do with treatment and how to go and what is an experience like, that I knew that it was important for me to share my story so that people either don't have the experience I had, because based on hearing this, me being in my early 40s, that they will get screened or do the different things they need to have those conversations with their doctors, or that as they're going through treatment, that they've got an idea of what they expect as they're going through.
Paul Weigel's book is Iron Dad, a cancer survivor's story of discovering strength, life, and love through fatherhood. His website is irondadbook.com. This is a multi-dimensional story, Paul.
It is.
It not only talks about your cancer journey, but also your journey through fatherhood. How has this experience changed you?
More than I ever possibly could explain. My story is multifaceted. I talked about life being hard before getting married, before having Natalie. I finally had something to live for when Natalie was alive. Well, I was going through treatment, and I've really tried to ensure that I have been there for her in every single way possible. First and foremost, 6 months after finishing my chemotherapy, as I mentioned, I really was afraid I was going to die. And I was afraid that my daughter wouldn't have lasting memories of me, or that I had just succumbed. And so I decided I was going to do an Ironman triathlon 6 months after chemo. And it may have been that she wouldn't remember the experience of being there, but that she would know that her dad wasn't a quitter if I wasn't around later. And I dreamed while I was going through treatment. I dreamed when I would have my chemotherapy backpack on, lying next to her. She was trying to go to sleep, holding her at the finish line. So we had that. And that was a profound moment. But then moving forward, where I had a life where I was working hard and playing hard and doing those things that I think stereotypical people do, men want to do, totally changed my life and my career. About a year after we got divorced, my ex-wife met somebody in Arizona. They asked me to move down to Arizona for them. And it was so important to me to be near my daughter as much as I could that I gave up my career up in Washington State, where I had been for 25, 30 years. I became a consultant where I worked from home. I became the dad who would walk Natalie to school every day, walk her to the door, attend every field trip she possibly would let me attend, even some of those that she wouldn't. And really, that my job, I do say I'm a professional dabbler because I like doing a lot of different things, but realistically, my job has been to raise a wonderful kid and be there for her as much as I can.
And now she's a teenager. What's that like?
Most of the time, it's delightful. We've had a rough week. We've had a rough week. It has been so neat for me to see her grow up. And especially in the last few years, as she has become stronger and more determined. It has been so neat to see her take some of the lessons that I tried to share, my exercise regimen and doing a bunch of different things around that we have done a bunch of 5Ks and shorter races together. There was one that she had said we were going to be racing right next to each other the whole race. And then right at the very start, as the gun went off, she just went out like a ball of fire and won her age group and was super proud of that. But just as much as a tween and as a teen, I've learned so much from her. I've learned she is so much more than I ever possibly could have imagined. And she is thoughtful, and she is kind, and she understands friendships, and she understands love, and she understands commitment to others and the importance of family that I never had growing up. She is 14, and she is stern and strong and opinionated, but I would be sad if she wasn't.
Tell us a little about the YouTube podcast, Paul Weigel, Iron Dad.
It has been a beyond exciting experience for me to be getting involved with the podcast. In the same way, as we were talking earlier in the interview, I wasn't really planning on publishing the book. Well, I wasn't really planning on doing podcasts either. But as I started socializing and hearing them and understanding the message that I really wanted to get out, and for me, so on IronDad.com, IronDadBook.com, the podcast, I've called it Gut Checks. And Gut Checks, in the same way Iron Dad has got multiple messages to it, Gut Checks does too. And if you're a cancer patient, or if you're going through something like that, that your gut check is the time that you are having a rough conversation with your doctor, that you are having to really dig deep and figure out what's going on with your body, because so often people are not able to do that, or are not comfortable doing that. And so there have been a series of my interviews that have included fellow cancer patients like me who have believed in the impossible and had the incredible come true, where they have pushed through and fought through different illnesses. At the same time, Gut Checks, there is an aspect of, we've talked about being a triathlete, and that sometimes you're but by being an athlete, you have to dig down deep and find a way to do something incredible as well. And so I've had a chance to interview several people within the triathlon community. For those who know the Ironman world, Mike Riley, he's the person who says, as you cross the finish line, "You are an Ironman." He was one of my very first interviews, and actually he's recording my book. I fly down to San Diego next week to do that with him. And then there's the aspect of, there are other people who've had gut checks in multiple different ways. I had a chance to sit down with Suzanne Stone from Livestrong recently, and Livestrong is no longer involved with Lance Armstrong, but is doing amazingly wonderful things to help support those in the cancer community. But it also believes in the key message that I believe in, and that is life. Live strong are two just incredibly powerful words. And I've been wearing my yellow Livestrong band for 20 years. And the only time I've taken it off is when doctors have insisted I have for surgery. But so there have been all these great experiences. And then I've got other people who are coming on. You and I will know this name, although people younger than us may not. I've been talking with Mike Ruzioni, who is probably going to be on a podcast as well. And he is the gold medal captain of the USA hockey team in 1980. For those of you who are younger than 45, he was one of the main characters in the movie Miracle, and that'll probably be a reference for you. So it has been just a wonderful experience to talk with these people and share in their stories, and hopefully bring more awareness about colon cancer, and let alone what it means to dig deep and do amazing things.
What's been your biggest takeaway from this experience?
I used to think my biggest takeaway was the power of perseverance, and the power of, when your back is against the wall, you just do what you got to do. That has been a key one. But the biggest takeaway is how important family is, and how important being a dad is, and how important being there to be with my daughter every single moment I possibly can. On those days, homework may be hard, but still sitting down and trying to do that, or have trips, or have just those moments that are those wonderful lasting legacy things that when I close my eyes the last time, I hope are like fireworks of all the great memories I've had with her.
Prevention begins with screening. And a lot of people have heard horror stories about colonoscopies that just aren't true.
Nobody really wants anybody going down there and doing any exploration, right? So there's this abhorrent, no, I don't even want to consider it. And then there's the aspect of people are like, and then the prep. I don't think I can really deal with the prep. And in many cases, it now is with Cologuard, or it is with another test where they determine if you've got any signs of cancer or not to worry about. And then the actual process of going through a colonoscopy, which is super easy. It's a night of a little awkward discomfort and spending time in the bathroom, but then it's a day where you get to have an awesome nap, and then you get to eat food afterward and just be totally great. And, you know, I've jokingly said that Hollywood stars talk all the time about going off and having a cleanse, and they spend tens of thousands of dollars to get it done. This hardly costs you anything, and it's covered by insurance. So I wish people would ask, is it really that bad? The answer is, it's not that bad. And the answer is, get your tests done and talk with your doctors as soon as possible. When they look back and they saw the size of my tumor and the symptoms, it is very likely that I had my cancer going for at least 5 years. So I very likely had cancer in my mid to late 30s. And had I been more aggressive with some of the discussions I had with my doctors, I never would have had to go through what I had to.
The book is Iron Dad, a cancer survivor's journey of discovering strength, life, and love through fatherhood. The website is irondadbook.com, and Paul Weigel is the guy who wrote it. It's a book well worth reading and one that could save your life.
But I hope it saves lives, and just as much, I hope for those dads who aren't as engaged with their kids as much, that they take those times. And we have good times, we have bad times, but at least we have those times, and to embrace all those. So thank you for letting me speak with you today.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.